Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Milton Board of Appeal. This is the continuation of the hearing for a comprehensive permit under the provisions of Chapter 40B for 936 Brush Hill Road. My name is Frank O'Brien. I'll be acting as chair for this hearing. With me are my fellow board members, Jeff Mullen and Nicholas Gray. Also joining us are the applicant and the applicant's representative, attorney Jesse Schumer, as well as various peer reviewers and other experts. Before we begin, and we will begin shortly, I'd like to ask Attorney Schumer and his team to provide an update for us regarding some of the changes that have been made to the proposal. But before we go into that, I'd just like to bring folks up to date because it has been a little while since the board met. The board initially had a hearing scheduled for March 30th. We postponed that hearing in order to allow the applicant sufficient time to prepare some changes to the proposal. Since that time, there have been a number of submissions that have been sent in to the board, and I'm getting the spinny wheel of death on the, here we go, on the town's website. So since the last time that we met in public, we've had a revised auto turn analysis. The applicant has submitted a letter with several additional materials, including a presentation noting some fairly substantial changes to the proposal with a revised design presentation. We've also had a letter from the applicant regarding the issue of dumpsters and dumpster size. All of those materials have been posted to the town's 40B website, and specifically to the portion of the website having to do with this application, which again is 936 Brush Hill Road. Beyond that, there are a number of other additional engineering and other materials that have been submitted over the course of the month of March, which I'll just note for the public's attention. And all of that information, as I said, is available on the public's website. Attorney Schumer, I know that you and your team have been very active over the past couple of weeks, and we have some significant changes that are before us this evening relative to the project. My plan this evening is to allow you and your team sufficient time to go through your presentation, and then I will ask the peer reviewers for the board, Cliff Bomer and Sean Reardon, who are also online, to provide some initial reactions to that. So with that, let me ask if any members of the board have any additional comments or questions they'd like to ask at this point in time.
No questions.
No. Seeing none, Attorney Schumer, the floor is yours, sir. Welcome to the Board of Appeals again.
Thank you very much, Chairman O'Brien. Good evening to you and to the members of the board. We're here before you tonight to present what I would call as a conceptual redesign of this project. We filed this, as you mentioned, Chairman O'Brien, last week with initial conceptual site plans from Embark Architecture, as well as conceptual landscape design from Verdant Landscape. And the intent with this, Mr. Chair, was to provide a sort of a, I would say, a 5,000 foot level view of the proposed redesign of the site, to get some initial input from the board members and as well as from the peer reviewers. And I'll just mention, Mr. Chair, we did have an opportunity to meet, I believe it was twice, with Mr. Bomer and Mr. Reardon regarding this project, and we did get some initial feedback from them on an earlier version of the plans that were filed with you last week. So in a summary, and I won't steal Embark's thunder nor Verdant's thunder with their presentation. the message, Mr. Chair, that we received from yourselves, from the peer reviewers, from members of the public, and Chief Madden, other town department heads, were basically that the site as it was laid out was basically not working for various reasons, for different reasons from different folks. But the common consensus we thought was that the way that the site was laid out in the opinions of all those folks, as well as yourselves, was basically it needed some revision. The consensus that we were receiving, and I won't put words in their mouth, from peer review was that the density of the project in terms of the unit count was close to being appropriate and on more or less on track with what they thought the site could support, but it needed to be redesigned in a way that was more appropriate for the neighborhood, more appropriate and sensitive to the neighbors, and made a better use of the site to improve access around the site, to improve emergency access, and protect trees and present a more residential feel at the front of the site, considering Brush Hill Road being a scenic road in the town of Milton. So all of those comments we thought came together pretty well and sent us in a common direction. And the plans that we presented to you last week, and Embark will go into them further tonight, are intended as an encapsulation of all those directions and try to move them all in the same direction, and hopefully satisfy everyone's concerns and comments and questions. With that having been said, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn it over to Jillian and Tim from Embark Architecture for them to run through the revised site layout and the proposed redesign of the building, which, as you saw in the plans, proposed to consolidate the two buildings into one and move it towards the rear of the site. In addition, tonight we've got Blair and Aaron. I saw them on the call, but they may have gone into the attendees list. They're available tonight to present the revised landscape plan, and I think that part's particularly important given the importance that we've heard from members of the public and yourselves regarding the scenic route nature of Brush Hill Road. So unless the members have any questions of me or would like to get any administrative business out of the way, I'll turn it over to Tim. All right, there's your cue, Tim. Take it away.
Thank you, Jesse. Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members of the board, members of the public. If you allow me, I'll share my screen. And can everyone see this? All right, there we go. So I'm going to run through some overall walk through the decisions that led to the revisions we've made, and kind of look at a broad picture of the updated site plan, as well as some conceptual architectural floor plans before turning it over to Blair to run through the kind of conceptual landscape plans. Before I do that, I just kind of want to remind everyone where we were on the previous site plan and the problems that the feedback that we were hearing in terms of what wasn't working about it. So we had the two building approach. There was a 2-story 8-unit building at the front of the site with a 24-foot setback from the property line. And then the larger 3-story building with 2 levels of residential over the garage with 12 units towards the rear of the site, with a parking area that we're using for fire access maneuverability kind of at the center. And I think the 3 main issues we were hearing were lack of maneuverability and access for those emergency vehicles, as well as just everyday trash and deliveries. An over-reliance on retaining walls, particularly at the edges of the site, to get the grading to work, which would have a significant impact on the existing vegetation that buffers the site at each property line. And then, as Jesse had kind of alluded to, just having too much presence on Brush Hill Road and being much closer to the road than the rest of the context, and not providing a significant setback and open space there that would kind of fit in the nature of the scenic road. So the goals we walked into this with were, as Jesse noted, consolidate the buildings to kind of create a more efficient footprint that we would slide back in the site to increase that front yard setback and give us more space to work with. And in doing so, minimize the presence from Brush Hill Road, both physically and visually. And Blair will go through what we've done with the landscaping there. in lieu of having that front building. And then also just using that extra space to improve vehicle maneuverability, particularly for emergency vehicles, but also for those everyday delivery vehicles and passenger vehicle traffic. We also work to simplify the grading and minimize the retaining walls at the edges of the site, which would reduce the impact on those existing trees and landscape buffer, both at the property line and beyond. And then finally, just provide additional programmed usable outdoor space for the residents and create a pedestrian connection to Brush Hill Road with the bus stop. So this is just very diagrammatic plan here showing the building footprints from the previous scheme to where we are now. So outlined in red is the two previous footprints. And then the dark black line is the new one. So we've consolidated the two buildings into a single 65 by 175 foot building. So it's about the same width of the existing rear building. And we've also slid it back about 10 feet on the site. We were holding 42 feet at that rear yard setback, and we're at 30 feet. That now increases the front yard setback from 24 feet previously to a 115 feet now at its tightest point. At the south property line, we've decreased the setback from 18.5 feet to 15 feet. And when I get into the plans more, we can show you how we did that. We wanted to slide the building to the south a bit to just provide more space for an emergency vehicle drive to the north of the site, to the north of the building. So here it is with the site plan showing the site entry relatively where the existing driveway is. We've shifted it significantly south off of that front property line to create a larger buffer with that abutter to the north. Access to the garage is now to the side of the building, as well as the trash dumpster enclosure. And we've also created this kind of entry plaza at the front of the building with some visitor parking. And before I go into, I'm going to go into each of these areas in a little more detail on the decisions that kind of led to this layout. I just want to go through the architectural plans before we get to that, though. So you're looking at the garage level plan here. As you can see, we've been able to get more of the parking into the building now. Overall, the parking count remains the same at 35 spaces, but now 30 of those are within the garage. And of those 30, we're showing 12 compact towards the rear, as well as a handicap space. And then at the front of the site, we have 5 visitor parking spaces with another accessible space. So overall, we have 23 of the 35 spaces are standard, 12 are compact, and we have 2 accessible spaces. The parking ratio remains 1.75. Before we were entering the garage just from the front, and at that front facade, kind of between the two buildings, you were just seeing utility space and the garage entry. We thought it was important, without that front building kind of shielding it, to move the garage access to the side and then free up the front of the building for much more kind of human scale and human centered program. So at the front corner, we have a pretty substantial lobby space. And then that feeds right off of that plaza area, as well as a kind of a secured bike storage area with more than significant parking for a 1-to-1 ratio to units, in addition to some visitor parking spaces in front of that. So both the lobby and the bike storage will be accessed from the front of the building and from the garage itself. We've also moved the rear egress stair from kind of within the building to outside the footprint in order to kind of make the parking as efficient as possible. The final thing I want to note on this plan is the elevator. We've added an elevator because we've changed the unit typology of the building. The first thing we looked at after combining was to maintain that kind of stack flat approach for the private entry for each unit. And per Mr. Bomer's suggestion, we looked at doing kind of a single story, like a 1-bedroom flat on the ground floor, and then a kind of duplex on the second and third floor with dormers in the roof. But one of the problems with doing that originally was part of the complications in the grading and the reliance on the retaining walls was to provide entry conditions around the whole perimeter of the building for those private entries. So in order to simplify everything, we thought it was just more efficient and it would make a better project to just go to a double loaded corridor with an internal circulation. So that's what we did. So we have 10 units in each floor, 2 floors. There's no occupying the roof, although we're going to stick with a gable roof just for the aesthetic approach. It's a combination of 1, 2, and 3 bed again. On each floor, we have 4 1 beds, 4 2 beds, and 2 3 beds for a total mix of 8 1 beds, 8 2 beds, and 4 3 beds. And now, unlike before, one of the other benefits of this is just every unit will be fully accessible. One other thing on this plan here is just the patio area to the rear. We've maintained that. It's a little bit smaller than it was previously, but we've offset that with additional open space at the front of the site. And that's now directly accessible from the rear of the building, from that main living level through that rear egress stair. So it's more accessible to each unit than it was previously. So that's another benefit of the internal circulation. So now just kind of stepping through some of the individual aspects of the revised site plan itself. As I had kind of noted before, one of the things we wanted to do with the actual driveway entry is shift it south off of that front property of that property line to just reduce the amount of retaining wall we had there, kind of grade up naturally, and also maintain some of the existing trees as well as add additional landscape buffer to reduce the impact on that neighbor. So you can see here the two of the trees, 2 of the existing evergreens that are shown in plan here are going to be preserved. And if you look in the image to the top right here, the kind of 2 check marks on those trees are the ones that are being preserved. And then the third tree here is just off, just to the north of the property line. But those are kind of some nicer mature trees that we wanted to maintain, to provide that kind of visual separation of the building, screen the building itself. And then we'll be adding, I don't want to get into the landscape plan too much here, but just conceptually, we'll be adding additional lower vegetation to screen kind of the, for vehicle exit from the parking area here to shield those headlights without relying on a fence like we were previously. Another approach we wanted to take in designing the driveway is adding this curve into it, which does a couple things. For one, it kind of centers the front of the building, the lobby itself, and kind of that main architectural corner of the building as you drive into the site, which is more inviting than previously where we're just looking toward the end of the driveway, toward the dumpster enclosure. And then that curve itself kind of reduces the overall scale and feel of the driveway, just visually from the road. And it's kind of more in line with the other driveways and kind of scenic nature of the road itself. The final thing I just want to note on this plan here is we're showing the driveway currently at 24 feet. It's our belief that 20 feet is adequate, and we provided the auto turn analysis at both 20 feet and 24 feet. Going at 20 feet would just further reduce the visual impact of the driveway and the total impervious surface. And that's something we're willing to work with the fire chief and the town planners on. But right now, we just wanted to show both options. In terms of the area to the front of the building, where the plaza area where we have the 5 parking spaces, this is going to be a raised paver area. So, and we have some examples of this on the landscape plan. So the pavement ends, it becomes a paver that are raised to kind of reduce the impact of the traffic and have a calming effect and kind of make it a hybrid kind of pedestrian vehicular zone. We don't expect this to have as much traffic as just residents pulling into the garage itself, and view this as more of like a pull-in area for deliveries or Uber pickups or Uber Eats or something like that. And then towards the front here, we're creating a landscape berm that takes the grading as the site grades up pretty aggressively at that property line as you get to the access road, to the Curry College road. We're going to kind of pull that grading into the site a little bit more and create a berm that screens that parking area from the road kind of at the lower level and kind of hides the parking. And then the new vegetation on top of that will kind of offer a visual screen of the building itself to really hide the impact of these parking spaces and the building from Brush Hill Road and kind of add to the scenic nature. And just a couple of images here in the corner, you can really, I think it helps illustrate how much it really slopes up at that south property line. So the idea is to kind of take take those existing grades and kind of pull them onto our site more, and as opposed to the fairly flat condition that exists currently. And then the final aspect of the kind of site entry here is the garage access and fire access itself. So as noted before, we have the garage entry off the side of the building and the trash enclosure at the end of the driveway here. These two dimensions I want to know, right now we're showing 34 feet from the edge of the garage entry to the face of the dumpster enclosure, which we provided in order to have an adequate amount of space for a large 30-foot moving truck to be able to park and stay in that space long term without affecting site access to the rest of the site or to the garage entry specifically. And then the 85 feet is from the edge of the building itself and where it turns on to the kind of entry, the parking plaza area, is certainly adequate to support the 41-foot ladder truck for Milton Fire. So you could pull in a emergency vehicle all the way and have enough room for two of them almost, or one truck and a couple of smaller support vehicles, and then still have the maneuverability to pull another truck into the front of the building. So we thought that extra run is just important to give as many options as possible in the event of emergency. The other thing it does is previously something that came up was that there was no way to access the side or rear of the building. We only had the access to the front. So that 85 feet is half the length of the building. And then from the end of it, there's direct access to the rest of the building on foot from the stair that's provided to that rear patio area. So just looking at the site section now, this was the previous scheme where we had the two buildings and we're using the front building up against the road to kind of screen it visually. And we had the fairly significant retaining wall at the end of the parking area in order to get the grading to work. So this is the new scheme here. So you can see we are holding that 118-foot first floor, the same as it was previously, which is 6 feet lower than where the existing building is. So the overall height of the building is exactly the same. The one thing we changed is instead of having the garage level at 108 feet, we've lowered it to 106 feet. We did that for a couple reasons. The existing grade is 106 feet right about here where we add the entry. So we really just wanted to match the existing grade where the garage entry was to limit the amount of retaining wall or regrading we had to do adjacent to the north of the drive aisle here, and really just use that space to have as much landscape buffer as possible. It also just provides a little bit more headroom for this type of building. It just will have a little bit more stuff in that plenum and probably a little bit more structure. And so just being a larger garage, it gives us that 2 extra feet, but it also just simplifies the grading coming in from Brush Hill. We're now only 2 feet higher than the road elevation itself. But so you're seeing that 40-foot building height as opposed to 38, but the actual physically the height of the building is exactly the same. The first floor is just lower. So the other thing you're seeing here is that that berm that was mentioned, and this is conceptually the idea of the vegetation on top of it and how that would relate to Brush Hill Road itself. The idea is to just kind of screen that parking. And you really get a sense here of, instead of having that kind of utilitarian garage and utility space here at the front, you're really greeted by the lobby and the bike storage and the plaza itself. So before I hand it off to landscape, I just wanted to go through a couple, just conceptually, some of the ideas for the programming of that outdoor space. So just some examples of what that landscape berm could be, and some examples of the patio area to the rear of the site, as well as what we're thinking for the bike storage, utilizing the 2-tier racks. They're very easy they're a lot easier from a usability standpoint than the wall-mounted racks. Now we have the additional space is adequate to support that now. And then the last couple images here are just examples of those the unit pavers for the parking in the plaza area. So with that, I can hand it over to Blair Hines from Verdant Landscape, who can just walk through the general the overall landscape plan and the approach he's taking. And there's only a couple of slides here, so.
Can people hear me? Hello? Okay, great, thank you. So for the record, Blair Hines, Principal Landscape Architect at Verdant Landscape Architects. So a lot of what I'm going to be saying is repetitive to what Tim has just gone over. But just to set the frame here, we're thinking about three primary purposes for the landscape. And I think it's changed, significantly in terms of one important goal, which is to fit into the neighborhood. I think as Tim indicated, we have been concerned about the character along Brush Hill Road, and by the shifting of the building towards the rear of the site, it really creates not only further setback, but it provides the opportunity to actually create some landscape that's more in keeping with the character of the landscape. And so our thoughts here were, as Tim had indicated, to create a raised berm by extending the grading from the Curry College site towards the north, and then to plant this berm with some large shade trees. So again, you're creating a little bit more of a landscape that feels similar to other abutting residences along Brush Hill Road. And I'll go into that with a little bit more detail after just covering two other important points. One is clearly this is a residence and we want to support residential living. And so there's really two primary programmatic elements that meet that goal. One is the kind of more intensive outdoor space that's to the rear of the site, so it's buffered from the abutters, and that would provide outdoor living and dining space for the residents in the 20 units. And again, moving towards the front, the idea of creating this kind of more landscaped berm is also a place where people could, sit and enjoy the landscape, and as well as providing, as Tim indicated, a pathway and a school bus waiting stop there on Brush Hill Road. In terms of the parking court, which is what I like to see, we've really been advocating strongly that this site is not going to generate a lot of traffic. And so the two issues that the design team has been really kicking around is how much pavement do we really need to support this residential use? If we follow the town's standards, it's 24 feet of pavement. And we think that part of what makes this development more intrusive is the amount of pavement in comparison to other residences and developments along Brush Hill Road. So we're advocating to minimize the pavement as much as possible. And we would look to the board and to the neighbors to provide some feedback in terms of the amount of pavement they think would be desirable here. Secondly, this parking court, which we want to provide both for visitors as well as for some overflow possible parking for residents and for deliveries, is again, it's not going to be a busy space. And we want this space to kind of minimize the impact of vehicles on the residents. And to this end, we've proposed that this be a raised kind of parking table, if you will, and that the pavers, again, start to create a little bit more of a feeling of courtyard and less feeling of a great big delivery spot. And again, as I think Tim indicated, we've been kicking around how much space is needed for emergency vehicles and for moving trucks and for picking up trash. And again, I think all these factors, we would like to advocate for more landscape and less pavement as is feasible. And we understand that this is an iterative process, and we look for feedback from the community. Another important thing in terms of fitting this project into the neighborhood is, as Tim had indicated, preserving some of the existing trees, and the two large green plant materials that you see at the front upper left hand corner of the site, we think are very, very important to preserve in order to create a scale element. There's a lot of large trees along Brush Hill Road, and keeping some of them here on the site will help to make this building feel less imposing within the community. Secondly, we're looking to preserve a portion of the pine stand that's right on the embankment that faces to the north and along that north side yard. Lastly, I think one of the advantages that we get for this site is the Curry College property, which is all wooded along the south side and along the east side of the development. So we think this creates a very nice sheltering of this development in terms of its impact on Curry College, but also creates a nice setting for the residences. And as Tim indicated, we're trying to scooch the building as close to the south property line as is feasible. With the internal circulation, that's allowed us to get rid of a significant amount of the walls and diminish the size of the walls along the south property line. In order to create the outdoor landscaped area to the rear of the site, again, we will need to have a wall that's about 3.5 feet high in order to create a little pocket for that outdoor space. And lastly, and importantly, if you can just go up one, Tim, I just wanted to speak about the buffering plantings along the north property line. So in addition to preserving 2 of the existing trees, we have a significant amount of additional space in there to provide evergreen planting and other types of deciduous plant materials to, again, create a much more robust screening between the proposed development and the neighbor to the top of the sheet. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have, but that's the general summation of what we're thinking in terms of landscape architecture on the site.
Thank you, Blair. Mr. Chair, that concludes our presentation for tonight. I was informed just before the meeting started that unfortunately we're not represented tonight by our civil engineers. So if there are any site civil questions, I'll be sure to bring them back to Phil and Paul from Allen and Major. Additionally, we're unfortunately not represented tonight by MDM Transportation, although they did submit the auto turn analysis, as Tim mentioned, for both the 20-foot and the 24-foot wide access driveway. And our intent with respect to that would be to try to set up a meeting with Fire Chief Madden at some point in the next week or two to try to get some feedback from him in terms of what direction he wants us to go regarding the width of the driveway, and then finalize that detail as we move forward. But with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chairman O'Brien, for any questions of any of the members of our team tonight, and feedback if you have any for us.
Thank you, Mr. Schomer. Any questions from members of the board at this point in time? Mr. Mullen.
I'm wondering on the landscape architecture, I'm wondering if the applicant could give us an idea of the amount of expense, the significance of the landscaping as a percentage of its overall budget. In other words, I want to try to get an idea of whether this is a small, medium, or a large landscaping approach to try to address some of the issues that they've heard. You know, I mean, it looks extensive, but I can't tell. So I'm wondering how much money is going to be applied to this. I mean, Blair probably understands what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah,
I'm asking it in a good way, but I think you understand.
I do. I think that the proposed landscaping here is very robust and significantly more than is often the case with developments, particularly for 20 units. And I think that the predominance of this effort is really being for the front of the site, both in terms of planting the proposed shade trees on this knoll that we've advocated for, as well as the evergreen trees that you see along the north property line and that small pocket of them that are to the southwest and to the south of the parking court. So we thought that this was very important, and the development team has been in support of that. So that's the main area that we see that we want to be robust in the amount of planting. The planting that are along the south property line can be much smaller and more adaptive to the environment, which is largely in the shade. And then similar to the rear of the site, again, there's not a significant amount of plantings. And again, we would have slightly smaller plantings there in order to support the more robust size and numbers of plantings to the front.
Thank you. There's been testimony at previous hearings from the gentleman who has the house across the street. I think he's spoken at least twice, indicating that his view from, I believe, his second floor was into another window. I wonder if the applicant's team has or can prepare some renderings as to what these, I appreciate the purpose of the berm to shield the parking, but I'm also interested in what that looks like as you travel along Brush Hill Road or from the adjoining properties, whether there could be some renderings to what that would look like both at the initial point of planting and perhaps in, say a reasonable period of time when those plants get a little bit more mature.
I can address this, Jesse. Renderings, particularly from the Brush Hill Road approach from either direction, which we had originally submitted, is definitely something we will have as we go forward. Landscape in particular in renderings is kind of tricky and a little more difficult than just a building. So we wanted to make sure that we did it justice, want to rush them. So we also had, I think we had shown a similar approach to planting versus fully mature with those kind of streetscape sections, I think in the previous presentation we had given. So we can look at taking a similar approach to the renderings themselves.
Okay. And then the final question I have is, I appreciate the point about the 20 versus the 24, and I like to hear from the fire chief on that. But could you tell me how wide the existing driveway is?
Tim, do you have that figure in your
I'm
presentation?
pretty sure it's 12 feet.
That's
it's roughly 12 feet.
Yeah, and that, and so I think that's part of what we're thinking about is, what's a reasonable amount of pavement in terms of providing necessary access, not only for residents, but for vehicles. And we hope the fire chief is flexible in his mind.
Yeah, and that would include in both cases the sidewalk, but you didn't have an independent dimension on the sidewalk, did you?
The sidewalk is 5 feet wide, the one that goes from the parking court and lobby down to the Brush Hill Road.
Oh,
That's 5 foot. That's 5 foot wide. Yeah.
And that's accessible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, the grading is fairly flat at the front of the site here. So the way we're bringing the topography to create the berm, it kind of runs parallel to that. So it kind of at the bottom of it.
Thank you. No further questions.
So just to iterate that, as Tim had mentioned before, the building first floor is significantly lower. So there's not a whole lot of difference from the parking court now and Brush Hill Road. Yeah. And so part of the purpose of the berm is to create a little bit more landscape by extending the elevations that are in the Curry College site to the south into the site so that it tucks that parking below grade.
Where's the handicapped entrance to the building?
It's the main lobby is handicap accessible. So the whole parking court is at one essential level, although it's sloped to drain.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Both the lobby entrance itself and the kind of garage to lobby connection would be flush thresholds for direct access to the elevator. Yeah. So fully accessible from both ends.
No further questions. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
Right.
Thanks. I am very grateful to your team for going back to the drawing board, as it were, and coming up with this particular iteration of the project. At least as from what I'm seeing so far, I think it's addressed a number of the concerns that I've heard at the earlier meetings, and I'm very grateful for that. in it, just, I guess, two questions to clarify. I don't know why I'm focusing on the berm and the court, because I'm looking about maybe this could maybe a question for the site civil person, but can you just explain a little bit, if you know at this point, how the drainage is going to work from the court area? That's where those 5 spaces are. Yeah.
I can address that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, it's permeable. The proposal is to have underground stormwater storage chambers, both underneath the parking court as well as within the driveway, that would fully handle all the required stormwater storage that's mandated by regulations. So this actual approach allows all that to be actually under pavement rather than under landscape, which would limit the amount of planting and so forth. So that's been thought through.
So I guess then the berm won't function as a dam, as it were, that would keep runoff from. Yeah, no. I figured you had a way of dealing with it. I was just curious.
Good question.
Yeah, no, I like it. I'll be very happy to, very pleased when you're able to show what the renderings look like from across the street. My impression is that the berm is going to. I'm hoping it. I have big hopes for the berm in terms of being able to help maintain the scenic the current look and feel of Brush Hill Road as you proceed up and down. And so I'm thinking with that and with the plantings that you've got on there, I think that's a great step. And beyond that, I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Gentlemen, I have a couple of questions. First of all, building upon Mr. Mullins' line of comment and questioning concerning the sight lines. Going back to your presentation, looking at slide A16 from Embark, which, yeah, that's the one. I would love to see similar sight lines for the next slide, which is A17. And I guess that meshes in with the comments that Mr. Mullen was making concerning the impact for the neighbor across the street, both in terms of the berm as well as the height of the building. I believe it was noted during the course of your presentation that the newly redesigned building is the same height as the originally proposed second building. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So I'd love to see, as Mr. Mullen would, some visual presentations regarding the visual impact from across the street and standing in the street. So I join him in that request. The second thing I'd like to ask about is the raised parking table. This sounds like it, now that I've heard that one of the plans is to put some of the drainage related apparatus under that particular location. This sounds like it's going to be a pretty important piece of the project going forward. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah, we would agree with that.
Okay, I see a lot of shaking of heads.
There's a shaking yes.
Okay. What is meant? Explain to the lay person what is meant by a raised parking table, and I'm not sure who the correct person to ask that question to.
Well, that's what that means, and sometimes you'll see this in urban areas where traffic has to come up to essentially sidewalk elevation in order to slow traffic down, and then it goes back at an intersection. So, for example, a lot of Cambridge roadways are that way. So what it does is it really keeps people from just, zooming into that space because they come up and they're kind of coming up 6 inches in elevation. So it forces the vehicles to slow down. And there's no reason that we need speed in such a small, circulation system here. So it helps to reinforce that. And then secondly, by having the type of pavement change from asphalt pavement into this other type of pavement, it creates a visual kind of heads up that something new is happening here. So that's what we wanted to emphasize here, so that vehicles are going slowly into this area.
So there's like an apron that would
That's correct.
essentially
Yeah.
produce a bump, and then there's
Yes.
a visual cue that you're
Yeah.
entering into
Correct.
a slower
That's
speed zone.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, generally it's 3 to 4 feet that goes up 6 inches. So it's very similar to the way in which if you have a public sidewalk, you have that kind of slope concrete that comes up to the sidewalk elevation. And, as you're going to driveways that way, you can't go zooming in because you're going to bottom out your car, hitting that quick grade increase. So that's the concept here.
Okay. Sticking with the pavers for a second, but moving northward to the area, yes, exactly, where the trash is. Is that, I just want to make sure that I understand completely, that would be the grass checkerboard paving where essentially a large moving truck or the trash truck would come in and take care of its business at that particular point. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, it's an area beyond the garage entry that would get limited use, less traffic, and these are still able to support the weight of a larger truck while offering a pervious material.
Okay. What is the material that is in your thinking for the sidewalk that Mr. Gray and Mr. Mullen noted, as well as some of the
Okay, so that part,
hardscaped areas around the building?
Blair, you muted yourself.
the sidewalk that goes from the parking court to Brush Hill Road would be cement concrete. And similarly, the set of steps and the walkway that goes from the pavement there near the garage up to the rear of the site would again be cement concrete.
And then switching over to
Some type of
a paved,
paver, yeah, in the rear.
as indicated by the kind of thumbnail here.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any further questions at this time. Do any other members of the board have any additional questions? Nope.
No.
Okay. So for no better reason than Mr. Bomer's last name begins with B, we'll start with Mr. Bomer. So Cliff, good evening.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. Nice to see all of you. I'm Cliff Bomer, spelled with a B. I'm the peer reviewer on architecture. And I'll start with a couple points. I would confirm that we had productive working sessions with the developer. I think everybody can see there's been significant change. And I'll just talk about a few points in detail after that. I do want to emphasize, and I appreciate both Attorney Schumer's and Tim's point about this being conceptual. It's really important. We're not looking at buildings, we're looking at concepts. I appreciate that. And to that point, I think conceptually the project has moved significantly in the right direction. I think that Tim said it most succinctly, I think, which was the previous incarnation of this project, I think, really just had too much presence on Brush Hill. It was very well outside the existing pattern of development. In order to make that work, there were a lot of really serious engineering issues, and I don't think it ever could have fit in, given the degree to which the existing site would have been modified, the loss of mature existing trees. I think it would have been an imposition that wouldn't have worked very well. And I appreciate the developers' willingness to really make a radical reconsideration of their site strategy. So in a little more detail, again, speaking on a conceptual level, because I support every additional exhibit that you board members have requested. Those are really important. But on the conceptual level, certainly moving the site much further away from the street is a huge difference. We talked about it very early on about that, the possibility of combining those two buildings into one. And I think they've figured out how to do that. I think moving it to the south, we don't generally like seeing moving closer to borders, but in order to make this concept work, I think tweaking it towards the south was the right direction to move it, to make this happen, and certainly retaining the trees in that northwest corner of the site is an important gesture. I think other conceptual ideas that I think have a lot of promise. I think the berm is a very good idea. I think it can work. The details matter, and I appreciate that the board has already noted that they really want a little more meat on that bone about what it will actually look like, how is it perceived from the street. I think the idea of narrowing the driveway and generally decreasing the paved area is smart. I think that, so going to 20 feet from 22 or 24 feet, in my opinion, given that you're basically serving 30 parking spaces, is really makes a lot of sense. Moving more of the parking into the garage instead of outdoors works extremely well. I think it's very clear that having an elevator-fed building is the right idea for a lot of reasons we're all aware of, whether you're dealing with children and carriages or shopping carts or whatever it is you're dealing with in your building. It makes a lot of sense to have an elevator-fed building. So I think that is really good. I think the questions that were coming up about the elevated space in the front, I think to whatever degree that change of material and change in elevation, subtle change in elevation, could help support that space as a multi-use space instead of just parking is a great idea. It's happening in a lot of places. I noticed they didn't call it a Woonerf, but I guess it is a kind of Woonerf, maybe Milton's first. So I think that is an idea that is worth looking at and trying out. For me, the primary missing documents, I think you've mentioned them. And again, I'll emphasize that they're not representing that they've designed a building yet. We're looking at a concept. I think where we need to go, at least where I think I need to go from here, is looking at what is this building. Clearly, I don't think that any of us expect to see it as simply rectangular as it is. I think in order for a building of this scale to work, it's going to need really meaningful articulation in the massing of the building. it's doable. I think now they've given themselves some space that they can make something happen with that massing that I think will work. I'm going way back to that original letter I wrote, which was back in February, not that long ago, but you know, there are larger buildings that are visible from Brush Hill, but the detailing of those buildings really matters, the massing and detailing. And now this building is moved significantly further away, which is in the, I think in the spirit of other larger buildings on Brush Hill. So looking at what the actual building design is, I think is where they would take this next. I am really interested in the grading plans, I think from a civil engineering perspective. There's been reference made to diminishing the height of the retaining walls. That's all good. We don't have a grading plan yet, and I'm sure that they're working on it now. I would make one other point, or maybe it's a question. That current parking court idea, the idea was kicked around at working session and maybe even in the hearing, the last hearing, that they're exploring the option of connecting with that Curry College driveway, if that made sense, even if it were just for emergency purposes. I'm just wondering if that current configuration is in anticipation of continuing to look at that idea, or are we thinking that idea is probably not likely to happen? But I think that's what I have to say. I'm looking forward to seeing what the proposed building is, but conceptually, from my perspective, I think the approach has in every way, really, from where we started, shown a higher degree of sensitivity, both to the immediate neighbor, the single family home neighbor, and to the views from the street and the history of that and the nature of Brush Hill. So I support the direction and hope they keep moving in a similarly sensitive fashion.
Thank you, Mr. Bomer. Questions or comments from members of the board for Mr. Bomer?
No questions.
No questions.
I do have one, Mr. Bomer. I know that we're not at the point in time where, and this is conceptual, and I've noted that you've put a fair amount of emphasis, as has the applicant, on the installation of an elevator in the building now. Does the installation of an elevator have an impact on the height that would be the height of the roof line? Doesn't there have to be machinery on the roof dealing with an elevator?
I think well, at a minimum, there needs to be override for the elevator. So there's space that would generally go above the roof level by 4 feet, something like that. I think the overrun has to extend something like 12 feet above the top floor that's served by the elevator. So there is a parapet proposed on the building. I think we need to see that in the massing and the renderings, how that will work. If there's a stairwell that's going up to service the roof, which the fire department may want, I'd recommend that be the rear stairwell, not the front stairwell. But it's point well taken, but they're not proposing a roof deck. If you had a roof deck, that would be a much more significant appendage onto the roof. But in a normal design, I think with a decent sized parapet, you'd want to look at the sight lines from the street, and I would expect to see what that would look like in the renderings that they're going to produce.
I saw Tim is, Laranger has taken himself on mute. So Tim, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, that's actually something we're looking at right now as we're kind of working through the massing and the roof line. But we plan on staying similar to the existing kind of aesthetic and design of the original kind of rear building where we had that pitched gable roof. And because the elevator itself is set inboard a bit, there's enough space to basically kind of capture that within the gable, the roof, without it poking up above that. To Cliff's point, it's about 4 feet, give or take, generally about 12 feet from the floor itself, the last floor you're landing on. So there's adequate. We're certainly going to work the kind of the massing and shape of the roof line to capture the elevator overrun within it and not have anything that kind of pokes up above the roof unnaturally. And then also kind of to his point, I meant to mention this earlier in the presentation, but an additional benefit of having that kind of internal circulation is we do have that common stair access to the roof that can serve the mechanical equipment that will be up there, but also be used by the fire department for direct roof access, which we didn't have in the previous scheme.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions or comments from Mr. Bomer or members of the board? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to ask Mr. Reardon to provide some initial comments. Sean, the floor is yours.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. And again, for everybody's reference, Sean Reardon, I'm the board's technical reviewer for civil engineering and traffic. First and foremost, great meeting with the team. And I think what we see here is really a thoughtful and responsive effort to address, I think, almost all of our comments. What I'm particularly struck by is, in listening to the presentation, is really sound reasoning behind every decision, which I don't know was there in the beginning, but clearly, I mean, every little thing has been thought about, which I appreciate. So it's the sound reasoning behind the decisions that really make me feel, that we're on the right track. Big takeaway, anything that makes a more efficient building and parking layout means that there's less complexity in the design, less problems in the design to get utilities in, to get traffic around. So really consolidating the building into one single form really goes a long way into sort of creating the breathing room that we're typically looking for. That adding to that the building type is a lot more, as Tim mentioned, a lot more easier to fit into a difficult landscape. So eliminating all these exterior doors and the sidewalks that need to extend to them, it makes it very much less an effort to make the building fit within the lot. So, all positive things and all, significant benefits in contrast to the prior application. As I think Cliff mentioned this too, that having more parking under the building is certainly less environmental impact, much cleaner stormwater, less heat islands. So really, the more parking that goes under the building, the universally better that is. I reiterate Cliff's point also about that area out front being a multi-use area. That seems like a really perfect way to sort of expand the usable space of that area, because I mean there's already a patio there. It's going to be a low intensity area for use, very easy to cordon off, very easy to make into some sort of a outdoor function space or something like that. So really pleased with that. The other thing that I'm struck by is the bike storage is like perfect. I mean, I can't imagine it being in a more perfect location. So, usually we're used to seeing that just like sort of sequestered in the back corner. In this sort of presentation, it's like ideal because it's right next to the lobby. It's accessible from the front of the building, accessible from the garage. So really a perfect use of that space. A couple of things I just caution is, I'd like to see grading. So it's going to be part of what we look for next. But that being said, the changes that we just talked about make grading all that much easier. So I think with the changes that they've made, the problems that were so hard to solve in the last iteration now become a lot easier to solve. So I'm not really afraid of what I'm going to see. I'm just more curious to see how it works out. I would caution that we've got to look at the underground storage systems to make sure that everything we see in the landscape is achievable given the utility connections and the underground detention system. The only thing I see as a potential concern about the raised front parking area is if the fire truck is going to be backing into that space or backing out of that space, usually not a great idea to have them have to turn on an abrupt grade change. So I think that's something that we'll have to talk about with the fire chief. That being said, I don't think you lose very much if that raised table goes away and instead you just have a change of material that's at the same elevation. I think that still accomplishes a lot of the same things that we're trying to do out there. And then I think the only other concern is just interested to see what the fire chief is looking for fire access to the garage. And I think that's where that bike storage area, again, sort of creates an ideal emergency pathway to the garage. So I just see a lot of really good things from this plan.
Thank you, Mr. Reardon. Any questions or comments from members of the board for Mr. Reardon? Seeing none from Mr. Mullen, Mr. Gray. No questions. So, thank you, Mr. Reardon. I guess from the sound of things, Sean, we've got a number of questions that need to be propounded to the fire chief. Vehicle access, as well as general access and the raised parking space and the ability to turn, as well as the width of the driveway and things like that. Also sounds like we have a number of site civil issues that need to be brought before the board. Drainage, grading, stuff like that. Have I missed anything?
No, I think you've got it right. And not to say that I see any problems with it, just it's documentation that's required.
Okay, thank you. At this point, Mr. Schomer, is there anything that you would like to add to this, or is there anything else that you wanted to bring to the board's attention this evening?
Yes, Mr. Chair, just one thing to touch on a point that Cliff made, and I deferred commenting on it at the time because I thought Sean might raise it as well, which was
I noticed that Mr. Hines has his hand raised as well too. So.
The point that Mr. Bomer made regarding the possibility of a connection to the Curry College site to the plan south there. I don't recall whether that came up at a previous hearing with the board, but that was an idea that was discussed during our working group sessions, and I would describe it as a outside the box thinking type of idea. The direction that we got, just to give the board members some background to this, was to consider whether it was feasible to make a connection between what you see there in the front of the site with the guest parking area and the driveway that's on the adjacent Curry College site for a secondary egress for fire vehicles and emergency vehicles. And it was requested by, I believe Sean made the request that we you take a serious look at that and not rule it out. And so the design that you're seeing here with the sort of the driveway ending there with I would call that an ellipses past the parking spaces. That's intentional, and it was done to preserve the possibility of making that connection if it does prove to be feasible. We've taken an initial look at this, and Phil or Paul from Allen Major will go into this when in their presentation of civil. It does have some challenges with making that connection due to the fact that the grade in that section of the site is is challenging because at that point there, the site is grading up towards the rear at the same time as the Curry College driveway is grading down. So it would making that connection would be somewhat challenging to make the connection in a short distance with a going up and going down, and then also making that curve needed to connect to the Curry College driveway. So initially our impression is that it's not likely to be feasible, but we're not ruling it out at this time. And that's one of the issues that we'd like to discuss with Chief Madden when we meet with him and Sean, to get a sense from him as to whether that's a connection he feels would be useful to add to the site, whether it would add anything to his accessibility to and from the site. And if he feels that it's important, then that's something that we're certainly willing to explore. We would need to explore that with Curry College themselves, because we obviously at this point we don't have any legal right to make that connection. So that would be something to discuss in terms of acquiring an easement from them if it does prove feasible to make the connection. So that's an issue we're certainly looking into. We haven't ruled it out yet. We're taking it seriously, and we'll have more information for the board hopefully when we present on civil.
Thank you, Mr. Schomer. And for the record, the board, that issue has not come up in the course of the public hearings before the board. So this is the first hearing where that possibility has been mentioned, though I was aware it had been discussed during the work sessions. So thank you for that. Before I go back to you for a moment, Mr. Hines, you had signaled, I thought you might have had something additional to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to answer Sean's question that the landscape plan did include a grading plan, which has been initially coordinated with Allen and Major, that shows conceptually the grading that we're proposing.
Was it provided in this package? You're on mute.
Excuse me. The lines in red are the grading lines, and they're completely all around the building, from the property line into and around the site.
All right, they're pretty hard to see, at least on the version that but looking more closely at it, I can see those. I think that we're going to have to pay some attention to the grading plan. Mr. Reardon, do you have any comment that you'd like to make?
Yeah, Blair, please don't take this the wrong way, but I generally assign more certainty to engineered grading plans than landscape architects grading plans. So
no offense taken.
Incorporation of all the different handicapped accessibility, all the different minutia that typically engineers only care about, that, you know, I understand you guys sometimes take license with, but, you know, understood. I appreciate the grades being on the plan though. Thank you.
Spoken like every engineer that I ever met in my entire life. So thank you, Mr. Reagan. I appreciate that.
Just to further comment, Mr. Chair, we, as Blair mentioned, we did have this plan initially reviewed by Allen and Major. My instructions to the design team were to design pretty pictures that the engineers could actually make work on the plan. So we didn't just want to show you nice things and then not be able to deliver.
Thank you, Mr. Schomer. Spoken like a lawyer who has to deal with engineers in his professional life all the time. So thank you for that.
One or two.
But I thought only architects made pretty pictures. So, so I guess at this point in time, Mr. Schomer, does that complete your presentation? Or I'm not sure if you wanted to mention anything about, you did file an auto turn analysis. I'm not quite sure if that has any continuing, I guess for want of a better word, validity or applicability to these plans, but it was filed. Was there anything that you wanted to mention relative to that?
We did file the updated auto turn. I believe it was on Friday, Mr. Chair, with my letter, which did show the current layout of the site with the 20-foot and the 24-foot wide driveway access. And that was filed primarily for record purposes to make sure that the issue was flagged for you and for the peer reviewers, and so that we could have something for our meeting with Chief Madden when we have that with him. So that concludes our presentation for tonight. We don't have anything further to go into with respect to the civil plan or the auto turn specifically, unless the board members would like to go through it. As I mentioned, our engineer from MDM Transportation unfortunately is not on the line tonight. But our intent would be to proceed from tonight based on the feedback that we've received from the members and from the peer reviewers, to proceed to draw out these plans at a higher level of detail so that they're not conceptual the next time we're meeting with you, and to provide the next presentation regarding site civil issues to make sure that we can show to you and to Mr. Reardon that the site does function as designed, and to have fully developed grading plans, drainage plans, utilities, and everything of that nature at the next meeting of the board. And then following that, we would propose to have at the meeting after that, which I believe is the first week in June, the fully designed architectural materials with all of the building designs and the renderings of the site that were requested tonight.
All right. Before I ask what the pleasure of the board is, I noticed that Mr. Tamposi has his hand up. Mr. Tamposi, you have something you wish to say?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I did just want to, expound a little further. The purpose of the auto turn analysis that was filed was to show that there is, safe and adequate access to the site for emergency vehicles, and just sort of piggybacking onto the idea of connecting to the Curry College driveway. Well, we're certainly open to exploring that idea, and we have done, some preliminary analysis on that. We feel that, this site can be serviced, safely and adequately, from the single entrance as is. The connection to Curry College is not, necessary for making this site, meet with the fire code.
Thank you, Mr. Tamposi. All right, at this point in time, I'd like to get a sense of the board regarding overall reactions to the conceptual drawings here, and a little bit of the plan for moving forward. I, for one, am pleased to see some progress here. I think that this rendering, these concepts are somewhat improved from some of the original designs that were presented, and at least it merits further consideration on the part of the board. There remain, as there always are, a number of details that need to be fleshed out for further consideration and review by the board and by our peer reviewers. But pending that, just would like to get a sense from my fellow board members on what your opinions are at this point. So, Mr.
I don't have
Mullin.
any additional insight than what you're offering, Frank. I think it
Thank you.
appears to me to be an improvement, but I think there's some more work to be done, and I'd like to see that work. I'd like to hear from the neighbors, and I'd like to hear from the peer reviewers.
Thank you, Mr. Mullin. Mr. Gray.
I think this is definitely moving in the right direction, and I second your comments and Mr. Mullin's comments about liking to, this provides a good basis for moving forward, but we need to see more details and have input from the neighbors. That's all. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Schomer, just back to you for 1 second. You had suggested topics for the next 2 meetings of the board. I neglected to write that down. Would you mind just repeating what your suggestions were?
Certainly. My suggestion, Mr. Chair, was to proceed with the next meeting, which I believe is scheduled for May the 11th at 7 p.m., which is also a Wednesday on the every 3rd week schedule, and to dedicate that evening to civil site issues. And we would intend to file the fully completed Allen Major civil plans by the previous Wednesday, which would be May the 4th. And we would also be sure to have our traffic engineer present on that evening of the 11th. Our intent would be to have a report to provide on that evening with respect to a meeting with Fire Chief Madden, if one can be arranged between now and then. And hopefully we can arrange for Mr. Reardon to be on that meeting as well, to get his input as well. And if Mr. Bomer would like to be on that call as well, we're certainly willing to include him, as well as Mr. Zawinski. Following that, Mr. Chair, the next third Wednesday would be June the 1st, also a Wednesday. And we would propose to have that evening dedicated to the full architecture submission from Embark with renderings, building designs, elevations, and fully realized drawings at that point, down to the detail, not the conceptual plans that we're showing tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Schomer. I think that schedule sounds acceptable at the moment. Before I open it up to public comment and see if any members of the public have anything that they'd like to add, I'd like to give Mr. Zawinski, the town planner, an opportunity to make any comments if he would like. Mr. Zawinski, is there anything you'd like to add for the benefit of the board?
Nothing that I don't think anyone else has already said. I think to echo Mr. Bomer's comments, I think we are moving in the right direction. I'll be obviously very interested to see if this plan passes muster with Chief Madden. I think that is always a prime kind of mover in these discussions about site plan, making sure that fire trucks can get in and out and emergency vehicles can access the site sufficiently. But I do like the concept of the single building. I'm glad that the team is looking like they'll be able to make that work. I'm just repeating everyone else. Devil's in the details. We want to make sure that berm works. I like the idea of the raised sort of parking court. I think that is a way to slow cars down. I think Mr. Hines said it exactly right. It's an appropriate piece of kind of infrastructure for this site. And I think it's looking good. And I look forward to, participating in any of these meetings with the team to try to fine tune this project and make sure it's, obviously as minimally impactful as we can make it. So that's all I've got for now.
Thank you, Mr. Zawinski. And I could ask you to, as always, work with the applicant in terms of scheduling an appropriate time for coordinating with the fire chief and the applicant relative to this. So thank you for your comments. At this point in time, let me pause one last time and see if there are any additional comments from board members. And seeing none, I was remiss at the beginning of the call by not introducing our new support person, Ms. Crystal Rich. I think this is the first time that she has been before with us for this particular hearing. I'm sure that she's learning a lot about 40B and the Board of Appeals in general. As some of you may know, our longtime support person, Beverly Sutton, has moved to another position in town, and we're lucky to have Crystal join us. So at this particular point in time, Crystal, I'm going to ask if you could let us know if there are any members of the public who have indicated a desire to be heard at this point in time.
I don't see anybody right now who has their hand up. Nobody.
Okay. All right, hearing none, going once, going twice. Okay, sold. So at this particular point in time, I think in terms of homework related to the May 11th site civil writ large, we'll learn all about pavement, drainage, contouring, and things of that nature. So we'll have an opportunity to be educated by the engineers. And I will ask also Mr. Schomer, as you mentioned, to also hopefully touch bases with the fire chief regarding that. And then for the following meeting on June 1st, looking forward with anticipation for the full architecture submission to see what the artists have come up with. With that, let me pause at this particular point in time before I bring this hearing to a close and ask if the applicant has anything else that they would like to bring before the board at this time.
Nothing substantive at this time, Mr. Chair. I would only just like to thank Mr. Bomer and Mr. Reardon and Mr. Zawinski for their candid feedback on this project. They're very gracious with their time. We were on a call with them just about 12 hours ago this morning on a different project. So just want to say that their input and feedback is a critical part of this process, and they're here for the town's benefit, but they bring a lot of benefit to the project. And I think the two of you, Mr. O'Brien, and you, Mr. Mullen, were on the 582 Blue Hill Avenue project, and so you saw firsthand that part of the process really can improve projects like this, and I think it absolutely has here. So very much appreciated your candid feedback. It always helps us develop the project.
Thank you for those words. And I think on behalf of the board, I think that we echo them as well. I would also note that once someone told me it is an iterative process, and it continues to be an iterative process. So pausing one last time to see if there are any additional comments from members of the board. And seeing none, I'm going to adjourn this particular meeting, and this hearing will continue on May 11th at 7 p.m. with all issues having to do with site civil. With that, thanks everybody for your time and attention this evening, and have a good rest of your week. Thank you, everyone.
You too. Thanks. Nice seeing everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.